Welcome to Fill the Void podcast, where we discuss unhealthy human habits caused by the society of consumption. Welcome to Fill the Void podcast. Our guest of honor today is Amy Elisa Wong, founder of Always on Purpose. Amy is an executive leadership coach, author, and speaker, and her expertise in transformative leadership and communication strategies have earned her acclaim, including the 2022 Book of the Year award for Living on Purpose. Welcome, Amy. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. How are you doing today?
I'm great as well. Thank you for being here, first of all. And the first thing I want to ask you is if you can share a little bit about your background. And my question is how did you do it to get where you are now? How was your journey?
Well, it's funny. I didn't anticipate that my life would end up where I am now. When I was young, I had no idea that I'd be doing this work. I think my heart knew, but this vision definitely wasn't clear. When I was a kid, I was so fascinated by the really big questions. I mean, I don't know what kid isn't, honestly, but in my case, I really went deep and starting young. I was reading books by Wayne Dyer and Thich Nhat Hanh in 5th grade, and by junior high, I'm reading Krishnamurti, and I was so fascinated by the concept of consciousness and just the power of the mind. And so I had this real strong spiritual bend to my thinking, but I also had a really strong passion for math and music. So I'm a musician, but I just doubled down with math. I couldn't get enough of it in high school. I majored in it at college. I went deep. And so for the first part of my life, I really followed my passion there. And what I found was not only did I love these concepts, but I loved teaching them. And so when I was at Cal, I was, a UGSI, which is a undergraduate student instructor, and I was tutoring. And I realized, I think it was in high school, before I got to Cal, I had a tutoring business, and I play piano. I was teaching a lot of students piano. So I really recognized early that, gosh, you know what I love? It's like, yes, I love these subjects, but what I really love is working with these people to help them understand what's getting them stuck. Because what I recognized really early on was that I was really good at being able to listen for what they didn't know that they didn't know.
Yeah.
And that was what was getting in the way of them progressing at the subject at hand. And because I could hear that.
How did you realize?
I don't know if it's an exercise in empathy, but I wonder this sometimes. But I've had to coach folks on how to be a better facilitator, how to be a better teacher for whatever reason. And a lot, often I'll say, what you have to do is you have to literally put yourself in your student's head.
Yeah.
Right. And then in listening to their logic, listening to their argument, listening to their prose, you can start to see what's missing. Because from your vantage point, you've got a much bigger understanding of scope.
Exactly.
Right? You've got a much bigger understanding of the web. But from where they are, they're in the section of the web. And so in order to really understand what it is that they are not seeing, that they don't see, because they don't know what question to ask. And that's the most maddening thing. I don't know if you remember when you were learning math, when you'd get stuck. I've got a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, and sometimes my 11-year-old gets so mad that she doesn't understand it, and it's because she doesn't understand what she doesn't know, because she doesn't know what question to ask. Because the moment you know what question to ask, it's like, oh, right. So,
and this is a good exercise to even do it yourself. When you feel stuck and you don't see beyond.
Just asking the question, what question am I not asking?
Yeah, exactly.
It can open up some possibilities. But so this really was something it was not just something I liked. It was life-giving for me, Roberta. I lived for helping people through this. And I would use, math and music at the time. But then I ended up in tech. After I graduated from Berkeley, I went into tech. I worked at Sun Microsystems for almost a decade. And I would always end up in these roles where I was doing some form of this. and translating technical expertise to our end user, or whatever it needed to be. I was some form of some way of a go-between. There was constant translation because I
Yeah.
was able to put myself in the other entity's position and discern what's missing and how do we
Exactly.
close that gap in the most effective way. So then, life was fine. It was great. It was dandy. But I remember one day, it was before I had my son. I had the best boss. I had one of the best bosses in the world, and his name was Gary Rush. God, I loved him. He was such a great boss. I don't even think I was married to my husband at that point. But I remember sitting down with him, and we were going over stuff, and I was like, I need real purpose. And he looked at me, and I'm like, I get what we do, and I get that like this helps people, and it maybe makes
Yeah.
it makes the world a better place, but like I'm just having a hard time connecting what I do on a day-to-day basis to real purpose. And I just remember he kind of like lovingly laughed at me, like, "Oh, Amy," but I remember grappling with this. There is a void, right? And I know that's why we're here to talk
E-
about. Like, there's this
Yeah.
void, and even though I've got this great job, I'm making really good money, and I'm progressing, and there's a void here. Even though my life looks great on paper, there's something missing. And so then I get married, and
Yeah.
my husband's amazing. We've got this great life, and then I have a child. And I'll tell you, Roberta, there's nothing like having a child to just wake you up, right? And so
Yeah.
Aiden was a wake up call for me because it forced me to confront who I thought I was and who I actually wasn't, and what was actually really important. And it was painful. It was painful. And so he was the catalyst for my breakdown and then breakthrough,
Yeah.
which through this wild experience I had in my closet, I had this massive epiphany.
What did you realize?
Um, well, leading up to this moment, I was having a real hard time. I was really struggling with the fact that I wasn't going to go back to work
Hmm.
because I realized that it was just all kind of, I'm like, that, okay, so that's not who I am, and I'm not my job. And why would I go back to that and leave my precious son when, if I'm going to work, it's got to be for a darn good reason. And if that's not that, then I'm not who I thought I was. I mean, I was really struggling with
Yeah.
it's what's called identity paralysis.
Identity. Yeah, I was gonna
Identity
tell you.
paralysis. And so I was having a real hard time, and I just was starting to crumble. And in my lowest moment, I was in the closet, and the best way to describe this was I just had a moment of surrender, and I
You
threw
let
my hands
go.
to the side, and I looked up at the closet ceiling, and I remember saying out loud, I give up.
How
You show me the
relieving.
way, right?
How
You show
relieving.
me the way.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I don't even know who I was talking to because I don't like have some idea of some God out in the sky. I don't. I remember this like I give up. And immediately there was a response that I received, and I didn't hear it,
Hmm.
but it was almost as if it was injected into my body, and I was buzzing,
Yeah.
and there was this. It was just I was hit with this knowing, and the message was, Amy, you are going about this all wrong. It's not about figuring it out. It's about feeling it out. That's what life's about. And then the wisdom and what that actually meant, it was just injected into every soul. And in that moment, everything changed. And I recognized, oh my gosh, I've been on this path that is not even my path that I've been following because it's what we think we should be. Oh my, and all of a
All the
sudden,
time.
everything
Yeah.
made sense to me. I navigated and I committed in that moment. Okay, from this point forward, the only way I'm going to navigate my life is by following inspiration, not a strategy. I'm going to follow what feels amazing versus what sounds good. And
That's
very quickly,
incredible. That's incredible.
then, I went, I mean, it was almost like it was, it was crazy how fast I went from completely confused. And all of a sudden, I'm going to this conference, and now I'm getting my master's in
Yeah, but
transpersonal
that's
psychology.
amazing.
Yeah.
How do you follow what you feel? Because I understand it, and I've also felt that in my life I was constantly pursuing something. But how do you let go and release and like feel it out?
Yeah. Well, to really, for this to make sense, it helps to start with this very basic truth, which is when we look at our human drive for, to set goals or just have desires, and, we all want stuff. We want things. We have desires.
Yeah.
What we don't often realize is that everything that we want, it's not actually for the thing, right? So we'll have these goals. I want a new job. I want to move my job. I want more money. I want a bigger house. I want a relationship. So we have these amazing, juicy goals, but we think we want it for the sake of, that's where it's at. But ultimately, that's what brings us happiness. But really, what's going on here is we want what we want because we think it's going to make us feel a certain way. So what we want is a feeling, and we use the thing as a proxy. And so what happens is we forget, or at least we lose sight of this idea that what the most important thing is a desired feeling state. And so then we just start focusing on the thing that we think is going to maybe get us to this desired feeling state. By the way, we never really ask ourselves, like, is this thing the short path to what I really want to feel?
Yeah.
Right. And with a lot of my clients, it's funny, they'll be hell-bent on, I'm gunning for executive VP. I'm gunning for executive VP. And I'm like, and if they stop and I say, well, what do you actually want to feel? Gosh, I want to feel connected with my family. I want to feel peace of mind. I want to feel, and I want to feel, oftentimes they'll end up choosing something that completely forsakes what they want to feel,
Yeah,
right?
it's completely the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I bring this up because what figuring it out is being attached to the thing, or at least thinking that, okay, here's the plan. I got to get to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, and then I'll be happy, right? And so we figure out our way to happiness by virtue of focusing on the thing. And that's not wrong or bad, but it's not the whole story. And that's often why we end up in a void because we chase, or we just go after the strategy. So we're figuring out what's next, but we're not asking the biggest question, which is, well, what do I want to feel? And if I'm really clear on what I want to feel, so if I want to feel meaning, if I want to feel joy, if I want to feel, you name it. So I go, okay, cool. Now my job is to feel into my next decision. Now to feel it out, there's two states that I have decided. I don't know if this is an objective truth, it's my truth, but there are two states when it comes to considering an option. It's either going to be expansive. Well, actually, maybe there's three. There's expansive, or there's constrictive. Maybe there's neutral. There's probably neutral.
Yeah.
But essentially, if you want to go in the path of growth, if you want to move in the path of what you want to feel, you want to be choosing the thing that makes you feel expansive, right? And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, because how many times have you come across an idea that makes you go, huh? Yes. And it's almost like it breathes life into you, and it's energizing, and it's almost like you do this, huh? Your eyes kind of maybe get big and your chest expands, and it's like, oh, it's a life-giving thought. It's a life-giving option, and it feels expansive. It feels bigger, which is very different than the option that makes you go, oh, right?
Exactly.
And it's when I do that, it's like, it's in, when I'm sure we've all, and you have had those options that make you just feel like, but here's the thing about when you're figuring it out. By the way, when we oftentimes will, the figuring it out path makes us do this. And it can be really frenetic and buzzy, and it can seem exciting. Like, oh yeah. But there's this constriction to it.
It's not expansive.
Right. Exactly. You can either feel it in your head or your chest or your neck or your throat. And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to be so committed to this and so dedicated. I am only going to follow the thing that does this, even if it's not sexy, even if it makes no sense, even if it's not logical. And let's just see where this takes me. And oh my goodness, what? I wrote a little bit about this in my book so that people understood kind of how and why the roadmap came to be. But man, it's magical. Like just how quickly it took off. And coaching found me, and now I've been doing this for 13 years, and it's been like, I don't even know how to describe my life. It's like, I don't work. Every day is a miracle to me. Like I just feel I'm so blessed, so
That's
blessed.
incredible.
Yeah.
And also to be able to feel that, you need to have a lot of body awareness, self
Yes.
awareness. Sometimes we often disconnect ourselves. And also,
Right.
that's why I have this podcast, because what I say is we're like in the rat race sometimes, and we are always trying to fill that void with something meaningful. But
Yeah.
then in that pursuit, maybe we feel more empty because we don't find meaningful things, and we just numb ourselves and fill ourselves up with things to escape, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
like external achievements, whatever, and we get
Right.
temporary satisfaction, but then we end up in this vicious cycle, and we are incapable even to connect with ourselves. And like the
Right.
world around us doesn't help us to connect. And that's what I
No.
hate. I'm like angry in a sense with the world because
Oh.
all these temptations and these things that makes it even more difficult for us to
Oh.
go through the world instead of, right,
Oh,
making it
tell me about
easier.
it. And what you're saying really hits my heart because, as a mama to a 15-year-old and 11-year-old, there are just so many times I think, God, the world that you're growing up in is not the one that I
Yeah,
grew up in. When
exactly.
we were content to just go down the street, play in creeks and look for frogs,
Mm-hmm.
now to my kids, they're like, what? Like it's not even conceivable to them. And I don't know. It's like I don't want to get trapped into the okay, well that was better than now, but to your point, it's yeah, we're kind of we're disconnected more to nature. We're not as connected to ourselves because we're in our screens. We're on tech.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And what's your advice to give to someone who feels stuck in this cycle of dissatisfaction and doesn't know how to break free, like to
Mm.
find this purpose?
Well,
Two
fundamentally,
advices. Yeah.
yeah, fundamentally, it can be really helpful to ask a new question. And that new question is that very simple question: what do I want to feel? And the reason that might feel new is because the conditioning that we all go through is, what should I do?
Yes.
What should I focus on? Right? Should I change? And so our default tends to be to to focus on some sort of behavior change. And if we want to get to the root of this lack of fulfillment and really find true meaning, we have to go right to the source, which is, okay, well, what is it that you want to feel? And right there if just by asking the question can start to spark some insights. But for a lot of people, it'll stop at, well, I want to feel happy. It's like, okay, great, cool. That's a great starting place. Now
Hmm.
double click on that for me. Like go a little
Yes.
deeper, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a great umbrella term, but it doesn't give us any information.
Yeah.
And so this is where that journey of self-exploration is going to be really important. It's like, okay, well, what do I want to feel? And to really explore that, well, do I want to feel meaning? Do I want to feel connection? Do I want to feel inner peace? Do I want to feel freedom? Do I want to feel calm? Do I want to
Yeah.
feel, and it's what I find is where people light up the most is the feeling of progress, the feeling of ease, the
Yeah.
feeling of inner calm, the feeling of love, joy, connection. Like honestly, that's a great combination stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so we ask, okay, so what is it that I want to feel? So you start to get a little more granular. And then once that becomes more evident, then your job is to start making choices based on what feels more expansive in the direction of that awareness,
Yeah.
right? And it's little stuff. Like like what book do I actually want to read? And as you're looking at your choices, it's like, oh, my head tells me I should be reading about interviewing skills and this and that in my industry, and it feels constrictive. Because I
Completely.
really want to read about quilting, or I don't know, it's like something else. But it's giving yourself the permission to make choices based upon what feels expansive
Yeah.
versus
Completely.
constrictive. And where it's hard for folks to make this leap is because oftentimes at first it doesn't make sense. And we've been taught, don't do anything that doesn't make sense. That's not safe. But I'm here to say, actually, oftentimes following only what makes sense is what leads you
Yeah.
to the path of least fulfillment.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
And also because when you're thinking like, what should I do? We're always maybe feeling that dopamine because we are having that goal that we should do, but in reality we achieve that, and nothing happens. We
Yeah.
don't feel fulfilled and we feel empty. Yes.
Yeah.
And what I loved that I read in your website is the sneaky way we self-sabotage and what do we do about it? Because I felt I resonated so much with the sneaky way to self-sabotage because I
Yes.
thought like I personally like I do all the work in my week. I work out every day. I'm like I feel perfect that I succeeded in everything. I had all the calls. I did this, that. And then the weekend comes and I have like this rush where that the little like devil comes up and says like, oh, I want to do something wrong. And I know I will regret it afterwards, but like I want to do it regardless. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does this relate with that, or what is? How do we?
Absolutely.
Okay, what is
I'm
this
so
sneaky
curious, but
sabotage?
you have to share now, Roberta. Like, what do you do that's sneaky?
Many things. Even when I was younger, I was worse. Like even going out partying, like doing drugs, drinking alcohol, extreme things to
Yeah.
just feel alive, which
Yeah.
took me on the wrong path. And then when you grow up, you realize, but like you think those things are gonna make you feel fulfilled. So I was a dopamine seeker of extreme sensations in that way, and I was like doing everything good, but then suddenly I wanted to self-sabotage everything that I did in work,
Yeah. Yeah.
in sports. I played sports and everything,
Well, I think what you're sharing
even in
is,
relationships.
well, I mean, what you're sharing is, I think, a very, 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 very common scenario. I mean, and this is why I focus on it. It's why it's on my website. What it comes down to, in all the work that I've done, all the study that I've done, all the research that I've done, and experimenting, what I'm going to say, it might be not immediate how to make a connection between what I'm about to say and why we self-sabotage, but I'll build the bridge.
Yes.
But what it comes down to is, because of how we develop as humans, just in short form, like our brain is trying to keep us safe. Our brain that's trying to keep us alive all the time from the moment we're born to the day that we die. And one of the ways it keeps us safe is socially. So socially and environmentally, it's looking out for threats equally. Because, and we don't talk about this enough, and this is why I wrote my book. This is why I do the work that I do to help people understand why they are the way that they are. But rejection to the brain is way more formidable than we give it credit for. In fact, rejection triggers us pain, and it can be felt like death. And so on a non-conscious level, your brain's doing everything it can to keep you safe. Okay. So I share that because we have to understand, why do we take on these false limiting beliefs about ourselves? And what am I talking about? I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm a loner. I don't belong. I'm outside of the group. I'm not smart. There is not one human I've come across that doesn't have some form of a fear of that maybe being true, right? I'm not complete enough on my own. And so really what's happening here is that the existence of these false limiting beliefs that live within us, not so much at a conscious level, but at an unconscious level, cause us to try to prove ourselves safe, prove ourselves enough, and cause us to show up in ways to fill that gap.
Yes.
Right? That actually, it's like that I'm actually not enough. The whole thing is we take on these beliefs in order to make sense of. So here's what happens. It's in our young years, and it can happen at any point. But when we contend with formidable, significant perceived rejection, that moment to the brain is like, okay, brain's like, I gotta make sense of this. I gotta help you survive. So you gotta make sense of why this just happened. Oh, you must not be good enough, right? And so we imprint these false, and they're false. It's not true that you're not good enough. That your mom took you to daycare for the first time when you were young. It's just you had to work, and she had to work, and you had to go to daycare. But maybe that was the moment for you. I mean, who knows? I mean, this is happening all the time. But we imprint these beliefs in order to make sense of the pain. but it's those beliefs that we start running from for the rest of our lives. And so really the reason we self-sabotage is because there are unconscious ways of trying to do what we can to build the bridge between who we really are and who we are afraid that we are not. And it's just, and as long as those fears of not being enough, not being
Yeah.
worthy, or what of lack are running in the background, 100%, we will in some way, shape, or form
That's
engage
why
in
we
some
need
form of
to
self-sabotage. Yeah.
get into those feelings and process instead of running away.
Mm-hmm.
Or what is the way that you propose in your book about this?
Well, it's actually, there's a lot to it, and
Yeah,
but
I
it's
can
simple.
imagine.
I mean, it's simple in its essence, but and that's why why I needed to write a book about it, because
Mm-hmm.
what in discerning all of this and starting to see clearly how these beliefs get established, how we learn to survive from them, how we live into this paradigm where we try to prove ourselves enough and prove ourselves safe. We create these rubber band effects where we're like, just like you talked about, I was all good all week, and then I
Yeah,
drink too much, or I eat more than I wanted to, and
exactly.
it's so making sense of all of this. I mean, what happened was
And
in all the
can I,
hundreds of conversations I was having, I discerned
yeah,
a whole process to essentially come back home to yourself so that these beliefs don't run the show and you
I
don't
love that.
self-sabotage anymore.
Go
Right?
get into the void. Like I
Yeah.
always say, like we have to get into the void and explore the void instead of numbing it. So you build like a process in your book to be able to tackle the self-sabotaging. Can you explain that in detail?
Well, yes. I mean, but I would say it's actually beyond. It's even more than tackling the self-sabotaging. It's really, it's a process to
To get
ultimately
into yourself.
to find genuine inner peace,
Yeah.
presence, authentic fulfillment, and satisfaction. And really, at the end of the day, it's unconditional self-love. And that
Yeah.
sounds like such a cliche, because you hear this all the time. It's like you just need to love
No, but
yourself.
it's real.
But
It's real.
but really what unconditional self-love is when you make the choice to know that you are whole and complete. And the reason that is so, I mean, it's the reason that's profound is because when you choose to know something, you just choose it. And the thing about the thing that's tricky about beliefs is beliefs exist by virtue of the need to prove them or disprove them. And so again, it's rich, and this is so fun to talk about, but I'll try to keep it brief. When your sense of self lives in the realm of belief, I believe I'm
Yeah.
good enough, I believe I'm enough, I believe I'm worthy. The nature of belief itself requires you to prove it, right? Because you can't have a belief without conditions to validate it. That's just
Exactly.
how it
You need
works.
proof.
You need
Yeah.
proof. You need conditions to validate any belief. And so when your sense of self enters into this paradigm of belief, you become conditional. Now, the thing about that is that you'll never be free because of
Never.
the nature of proof and conditions itself. You will never prove yourself whole. You will never prove because the moment you go find proof, there's always going to be counterproof. Oh, okay, we got to work harder. I got to work harder. I got to work harder. And that's just the nature of proof. It's just, because in order to see this set of proof, there's got to be counterproof that makes this proof valid. That's just how it works. And so if I go set off to go get this proof to prove that I'm good enough, well, now it's up against its count. Okay, so I
We
got to
put
go to the next.
ourselves
I got to go to the
in.
next. And so
Yeah.
this is why we end up on the hamster wheel of, okay,
Yeah.
what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? And we're trying to essentially prove ourselves whole.
Exactly.
And we're trying to prove ourselves into this other paradigm, which I call the paradigm of knowing. Knowing is very different than believing. And so the work is to shift how you relate with yourself from this paradigm of believing to paradigm of knowing. Now here,
Amazing. I
knowing, you
love how
just
you
choose it.
explain it so clear.
Oh, thank you. But knowing, and the beautiful, magnificent thing about knowing is just a choice you make. And the most wild thing about that is that you can't use proof. You can't use justification. You just choose it. And so
Exactly.
to choose to know that you're enough is mind-boggling to folks because they've spent all of their lives trying to prove it. But that's what's kept them
Exactly.
trapped. But the moment you're like, well, actually, I'm just going to choose it because I can, because that's what's going to free me. Oh, and then you're free. I mean, and what I always laugh about with people is I'm like, this is going to be the easiest thing you ever do. It might be the hardest because you have decades of practicing proving yourself
Yeah,
safe. So it's going to feel really weird. Um, but that's kind of in a nutshell. But I break it down in my book, Living on Purpose, in part 3. Well, actually, the whole it all leads up to it because it's a roadmap of 5 deliberate choices
yeah.
to realize meaning and joy and fulfillment. And that what we're talking about right now is the ultimate culmination
I
of that
love it.
shift we need
It's
to make.
like so obvious in a way, but so hard to put in words and to you like shine light and make this so clear for us.
Oh,
So
well,
thank you.
thank you. It must
And
see. I think this is where I attribute my math background. Having studied pure mathematics, it's like,
yeah,
let's break this down in a logical
yeah,
way.
yeah, exactly. And coming back to the self-sabotaging, do you think that there's like a certain masochism where we like feeling the pain, or that's only in some people and some don't feel like this? It just
That's
depends on the
that's a tough
person.
one to answer. I don't. I mean, I couldn't speak for make generalizations about that. But my guess would be, and my observation would be that let's if one is entertaining a belief that they're unlovable or unworthy, right? That belief, if it's a belief,
Mm.
right now it's not entirely conscious, but it's there. Now a belief only exists because you're gathering evidence to prove it. And so because that belief exists, you're wearing these glasses that are constantly having you to tune to the world around you to acquire and to keep congruent the evidence around you to maintain this belief. And so you're going to make choices, conscious or not, that are going to align with
Wow,
this
yes.
lens. And so if you find, let's just say the pain of punishment, self-punishment, self-sabotage, if you find yourself unworthy, then it very much lines up. Then I deserve to be punished. I am bad. I am whatever it might be. And so we rather unconsciously, consciously make choices that align with these false beliefs that we have. That's just how it works.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I see it so clearly.
Mm.
um and how do you or what are some practical steps that you can name as exercises that people can incorporate in their daily lives to cultivate a deeper sense of maybe happiness or to have that purpose?
Yeah. Well, I would say, just to make it simple, the first the first question, or at least the first thing that you could start doing, is just waking up to how much you figure out your life versus feel out your life. And consider that really what you ultimately want is a feeling. And so entertaining the awareness of what you actually want to feel more than what you want to achieve, just entertaining, just trusting that that's going to start opening up some new
Yeah.
thoughts, new actions, new behaviors. It's going to open up a whole new world of possibility. And that, I mean, if we just stayed there, that actually can often be enough to create some powerful change. But then to take it a step further, as we talked about earlier, then put it into practice by feeling out your path. What does that mean? Choosing the thing that feels expansive
Expansive.
versus constrictive, and test it out. Trust. I mean, it might be scary because it might not make sense, and it might be like, oh my gosh, I don't know. But give yourself the chance to try and experiment and see what data you get back. Because there has never been an experience where I have chosen the relieving, expansive, life-giving thing and it bit me in the butt. Never,
I
ever,
like
ever,
the
ever, ever has that been the case. And what instead I get is delight. I get synchronicity. I get flow. I get wonder. But it takes some faith that something cool might happen here. But you have to let go of that habit of needing to figure out. And so if you just focus on those two things right there, It can create a pretty powerful
I love that.
shift. Yeah.
And I also like the word that you said, data, because it's important to take maybe if we act in a certain way, whatever the outcome is, to take it as data instead of judging it just as data, because we are a scientist making an experiment with ourselves, basically.
That is right. And and I'll just tell you something I absolutely live by. So I just decided that there's no word called failure. It's just everything's an experiment. Right? And if everything's an experiment, just go forth, get data, throw it back into the system. Keep iterating. There's no reason to be so scared. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Amy. This was an incredible conversation.
Thanks for having me.
No, I loved it. You're amazing, and truly thank you for these amazing insights.
My pleasure.